Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Pivoting with Purpose, defining the next chapter of your life. This is going to be an exciting and cool panel because we essentially have people who are going to share their own experiences with being extremely successful and still pivoting to another aspect of giving back to the world and their respective communities. And we've got experts who are really at the leading edge of their fields in how we are living longer, we are living more dynamic lives, and how should we be adjusting our society accordingly. Let me introduce you to folks who need no introduction. On the far left, to my right, you'll see Marc Freedman, who is the founder of Encore.org, really the leading expert on what we're calling the longevity revolution, how he's helping people find fulfillment later in life through activities which benefit the community. Next to me, you see Sherry Lansing, a legend here in Hollywood, the first female president of a studio. Her films, I think you've touched more than 200 films in your lifetime. She, too, has a book out now, has pivoted in her lifetime, and will be sharing with us advice on how we can all do that. To my left, you see Lynda Resnick, the vice chair and co-owner of the wonderful company. You've likely, at some point in your life, touched a product that she has marketed and put out there, whether it's Fiji water here on the desks or Palm Wonderful. And next to her, you see Professor Philip Pizzo, the founding director of the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute. He has had a long career in medicine and in academics and is now trying to develop an institution that helps people figure out what to do in the next phase of their life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel today. So before we jump into it, I just want to read some advice that a lot of these centenarians are giving. More people are making it to 100 and beyond. And I've, of course, pulled a lot of this information from the headlines, which you'll see throughout the hour. Let me just quickly give you some advice from the people making it to extreme old age. Jamaican Violet Brown is now the oldest living person at 117. She says, "I eat everything except pork, chicken, and don't drink rum." Indian Man Kaur is 101 years old. She's been running in the World Masters Games. You've maybe seen some video of her running on a track. She says perseverance is key. And before he died at age 113, Englishman Henry Allingham said, "The secret to longevity," I'm going to quote him here, "was cigarettes, whiskey, and wild, wild women."
There you go.
Sure, there was a bit of British humor there. But Marc, let's begin with you, because you've got a lot of the stats on this. What is the shifting demographic of the human race? We know people are living longer, but exactly how much longer and where are they?
Well, the research just came out projecting that South Korean women will exceed the life expectancy of 90 in about a decade, and that's they're at the front end. But we're also seeing this transformation of nations. So Korea will have between 40 and 50% of the population over 60 by mid-century, as will Japan, Germany, Spain, Italy. So these are not just glancing shifts at the margins, but they're fundamental transformations of what lives look like and societies. And we're set up for a life course that is 70 in a lot of ways, where you load all your education in the beginning and then you work like a maniac for the next few decades and get a balloon payment of leisure at the end. And that just doesn't work when you go from 70 to something approximating 50. And there's now evidence that half the children born in the developed world since 2000 will see their 100th birthday. So that idea is not just for all of us boomers who are approximating this juncture now, but these young people who will live much longer.
And I think that's what makes this panel so important. More people are living for many more years beyond what they expected, and this will be a continuing issue ahead. And so we all wonder, how do you change your sense of self or your sense of purpose? Sherry, for you, you're of course well known as a leading studio executive here. 12 years, I think, when you split it between 20th Century Fox and Paramount Pictures. You left, had to rediscover yourself. What were some of those challenges after being very successful and then having to reassess what matters?
So I think it was one of the greatest blessings. And actually, I was at Paramount for 12 years, 10 years as a producer, and 3 years at Fox. So it was a lot of lifetime in the movie business. But for most people, what starts to happen when you've done something for a very long time is you start to feel that you're repeating yourself. And if you really analyze yourself, you start to think that you know how to do this. And when that happens, the highs aren't as high and the lows aren't as low. And it's not that you're losing your passion, it's that your passion is going someplace else. So somewhere in my mid-50s, I started to realize that. I still liked movies, but I didn't have that same passion that I used to have. And I thought, wow, I always said if I became that person who was just doing a job because I knew how to do it and because maybe I was afraid of change, that I would not be that person, that I would change. And so I started to watch my heart. And I started to realize that my heart was moving away from what I did and moving into other areas. And for me, it was cancer research because I lost my mother to cancer. I think the causes find you rather than you finding the causes. It was speaking to my heart. Education, because I used to be a former math and English teacher. And then my demographic, and Marc is my guru, looking at people like myself and saying, wow, we're going to be alive, hopefully, as long in our, quote, retirement period as we were in our working period. So to quote another friend of mine, we better rewire, not retire. So I started to put my foot into these different things, or my toe, as I should say, and I started to really love it. Mm-hmm. And I started to have the same passion that I used to have for making movies. And so slowly but surely, I had a portfolio of interest. And so it was really very easy for me to leave the movie business. It was actually when I made a deal with myself that I wouldn't turn 60 in the job. And it was an arbitrary age, but I felt it was an age where I was young enough to have a whole new life, but not so young that I could wait. And so I said, I'm not going to turn 60 in the job. And I remember resigning before Thanksgiving of that 59th year. And I remember doing that because I wanted to have one Thanksgiving where I didn't have to read 20 scripts that weekend. And so I left. And I just want to say that I was like a giddy teenager. I felt joy like I hadn't felt for years. And it was like graduating from college. You know, when you graduated and the whole world was out there and everything was new for you, that's how it was for me. Suddenly I had to learn what a stem cell was, and Phil Pizzo down there was teaching me. And suddenly I had to learn about science, and suddenly I had to go back to the very same schools that I used to teach at. Everything was new, and I was learning new things, and I was curious. And I met new friends, and my world was getting bigger, not smaller. And I have to say, I felt authentic, and the last 10 years have, for me, been joyous. So what I would say to me when you read those statistics, obviously you need genes, but you also need curiosity and resilience, and I think change. And I think change is really what keeps you young.
And those appear to be the secrets to still being engaged, still being interested in living a fulfilled life. Phil, I want to ask you a quick question. It may seem unrelated, but work with me here. Okay. You once handed a baby with HIV to President Reagan when he was touring the NIH. You didn't know how he would react. Why did you do that?
Well, this was at the time when President Reagan came to the NIH to announce the AIDS Commission. He didn't want to, the story went, meet with a gay man, but he was comfortable meeting with a child. And I was in charge of the pediatric program at the National Institutes of Health that was focusing on developing new treatments for children with AIDS. And so we had arranged in advance for the president to pick up a young child from a little crib and to hold him, and everyone was going to take a picture. And the moment came, we were together, and I said, Mr. President, would you like to hold the baby now? And there was this long pause that went on, and eventually I realized that I'd have to do something. So I reached down, picked up this child, and said, Mr. President, would you like to hold this baby? His body was moving backwards, but eventually the child was in his arms, his smile came on, and the front page of every newspaper, right side, was the president holding a child with AIDS. And that was an enormously important gift to the world because it gave recognition that it was safe to do this. So I have great respect for that moment.
And your goal was to change the perception of people
That's exactly right.
who were infected with HIV. I'm just wondering, as it relates to this panel, what is the perception of people over 60?
Well, that's a very important question since I'm in that age group. And, you know, I think one could say you experience this all the time. There is still, as part of the world we live in, a fair amount of ageism. I'll just illustrate it in this way. Sherry talked about the times that we were together on the HIV, on the stem cell panel. It was during that time that I was actually the dean at Stanford Medical School, knew everybody, could walk along the corridors, and even though I wasn't seeking attention, people knew who I was. Within a week after I stepped out of my role as dean, I could walk down those same corridors and two things would happen, and it happens today all the time. No one knows or cares, so the perception that you feel is very different. And I've often had people come up to me and say, even though I'm still working full-time as a faculty member, how does it feel to be retired? Now, Sherry and I may have a slightly different view about that, but I no longer say I'm not retired because it feels like I'm making an excuse. I just say, I'm doing great. Thank you.
And Lynda, for you, you and your husband are billionaires. Your company is dominant in the Central California Valley. And you yourself are a branding expert. I'm just wondering, for someone like you, how much of the community outreach that you now have been doing stems from a changing self-perception?
In my late 60s, I realized that we were writing checks to organizations that we believed in, but we were asking other people to do the work. And I was so busy with my career, and I still do have an important job at the wonderful company. I'm in charge of worldwide marketing. I wasn't smart enough to quit that job before I did the second one. I have to work on that. But I realized that the world was suffering in so many ways, and that I felt that if I attached my business acumen to philanthropy, that maybe we could really make an impact, rather than trust others to do that. And so I started searching. It took me 6 months to find the right avenue to give back. And you know, I looked at Africa, and I looked at Southeast Asia, and lots of friends that have wonderful organizations to see if I could go on the board or whatever. And in the end, I realized that the people that work for us in the Central Valley, we have 4,500 employees there, really had tremendous need. They're off the grid. They're not part of the system, and they really needed support. And so I took some time to find the right little city that we would rebuild, and we found this little town of Lost Hills, and we rebuilt the infrastructure. And then I fell in love with the people because I was doing this myself. I wasn't delegating it. I had some people working with me, but I really wanted to be on the ground. And so we did everything based on research, not going in with our rose-colored glasses, but really seeing what the people needed rather than what I thought they needed, because how would I know? And once we rebuilt this town, we realized that without education, it would fail. And recently, in the last 2 years, we've started giving free health care to all of our employees and their families. So we give free primary health care to 12,000 people in the Central Valley, and we touch the lives of 55,000 children. Our kids are going to four-year colleges at our schools. They are doing better than anybody else in their county. And I've been reborn, just like Sherry, because I was losing the happiness, the joy factor in life, because I've done the same thing since I was 19 years old. And it was time.
Was there a moment you can remember where you said, I can do this?
Well, there was an epiphany. I don't want to bore you, but I'll try to make it as fast as possible, okay? So many years ago in the summer, we were at the Aspen Institute, and Michael Sandel is one of the greatest teachers at Harvard, and he teaches ethics. And we were invited to a dinner party, and I said, can I bring Michael, because he has a great lounge act. So they said, yes, you can bring Michael. And so he asked these ethical questions, and people have to answer them. And that was the summer when waterboarding was top of mind. And how do you feel about waterboarding? Well, all the people, you know, were against it at first. But then he probes a little more. What if you could save the lives of the village next to you? What if your wife was in danger and so forth? So the men went quickly. You know that. They were in favor of waterboarding. The women were a little more reluctant. He said, well, what if you lived in a town that was perfect, where every human being had complete happiness? They had enough to eat, their children were healthy and happy, their marriages were solid, and they had a great career. There was only one thing wrong with this town. Somewhere in this town, in a dark, dank basement, there was a child being tortured. What would you do? And people said, well, to torture one child to save the whole town, that makes sense. Other people said, whatever. And we got in the car that night, and I turned to Stuart and I said, I could not take it if one child was being tortured. He said, but the child is being tortured. What are you doing about it? Yeah. And that was, and that's the first time I told that story without sobbing. So that was the epiphany that changed my life, where I realized, and don't tell Stuart that anything he said, it'll give him too much power. But that was the moment.
It's a great
and
It's pretty incredible.
yeah.
And I think many people are seeking those moments, trying to figure out when and how do I have that epiphany. Just yesterday in this room, the New York Times bestselling author Shaka Singhal said he was able to turn his life around from crime and being in prison and being in solitary confinement to a life where he is now doing public speaking. He's speaking all around the world, and he says he was able to do it by changing how he saw himself, changing the perception of himself. Now, when you hear a success story, you hear your stories, it sounds so easy, but Philip, from what you've seen in your research, how then, what are the guideposts to changing how we see ourselves? Arianna Huffington and Deepak Chopra talked about the science behind this, but how do we do that?
Yeah, it's a very important question. You know, I think that the reality for many is that we tend to see ourselves as who we are rather than who we're becoming. And I think one of the challenges we face is the difficulty in giving up, you know, who that person was. I sort of learned this lesson very early in my career. I was interested to hear Sherry and Lynda, your comments. They were both inspirational. Mine started when I was very early in my career. I was an intern, and I watched a number of very extraordinary leaders in medicine and science be pushed to the side because they were no longer relevant. They were older people. And I made a vow, I was in my 20s, that I was going to have an alternative plan that would allow me to do something else when that time came. So I began a journey, actually, of saying I'm going to go back to graduate school at some point in a totally different area in history to recreate myself when the moment comes, because I don't want to get trapped, sort of my own epiphany, in the space that I've been. And then I realized when I was getting ready to step out of my administrative role at Stanford that that particular concept was probably highly generalizable. And that led to the point that you asked, a better understanding of what are the factors that will enable us to move from where we are to where we can be. And they're very simple. In fact, one of the whole points of this symposium today is that people need a sense of purpose. Think about what happens in our society when people lose purpose. It's one of the great testaments to what's happening in America today. The second thing is we need community. We need social connection. It's one of the things that really defines who we are. And then we need a kind of continued recalibration of wellness, not disease management, but wellness from a physical, emotional, and spiritual perspective. Putting those together allows one to make potentially a very significant choice of how our lives will evolve. And although we can think about that as occurring for people, let's say, who may be in midlife, same story applies to children, to young adults, to adults. Purpose social connectedness and wellness are the defining purposes of life.
And Sherry, you wanted to jump in on
I was going to say, I agree so much with what Phil is saying. And two things I just wanted to comment on that you brought up. First of all, you can't cling to the past. And so you're right. If you're, let's just take a simple thing. You're a parent and your kids are going to college. You have to let them go. You don't go and live in the room with them. So it's much like that with your careers as well. I mean, you have to know at a certain time when you have to let go. But I think it is incumbent on all of us in this room, and certainly all of us in this panel feel very strongly, we need to be the generation that redefines aging. Just like we were the generation, this boomer generation, that marched for civil rights, for women's rights, for gay rights, we need to redefine aging. And when Phil was talking about what it feels like to turn 60, I'm going to tell you a funny story. When I was 60 and started on this journey in not-for-profit, and there's a great shortage, I'm going to do this very short, but there's a great shortage in math and science teachers. So he came up with this idea to take people who were about to retire and who had math and science skills and to make them, retrain them, rewire them to become high school math and science teachers in underserved areas, like the vice president of a bank, whatever. But the committee that I was on to do this was comprised of, the oldest person was 35. So one of the most humbling moments in my life was when I said, I think there's a huge demographic out there that we could really use to solve this problem. And they went, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I'm 60, thinking they would go, you're 60? Not a blink, not a blink. It was like, yeah. And then I said, well, I think I'd be a better teacher today. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, no, because when I was a math teacher, when I was in my 20s, I was worried about getting married and dating. Today, I'd be, really concentrated on the kids. Well, nobody bought the idea. And one person who was actually like 35 said, what are you talking about? I mean, the teacher will come in and drool in the room. I got so angry, I can't tell you. But that was the perception until I said, Mick Jagger is 61, and he's now 73. And they looked at me, and they went, really? I said, really. And if he can jump up and down, then I can teach. He passed the program.
There you go. And he's a new father, too.
Yes,
as well.
73. So I don't think it's 60. I mean, I'm 72. I expect to live to be one of those 100 people. And I need, and we all need, I need to have relevant work. And it doesn't have to be paying or non-paying. But I need to have a purpose to get up every day. And if I don't have that purpose, and everybody has a different purpose, it can be your garden, it can be your grandchildren, and it can be a cause that you care about or a paying job. If I don't have that, I will get sick, and I will get depressed, and I will disappear.
And Marc, Sherry brings up a fascinating point, the resistance to this idea from other generations that there is a purpose, a use for people later in life. Let me, as the only millennial on stage, just play devil's advocate here. Why does it benefit all of us in this room if some guy down the street who's 65 years old feels better about himself and who he is? What's the societal benefit to the rest of us?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because there's a lot of societal benefit for people in the second half of life having a sense of purpose. We know that it contributes to health, to a sense of well-being, which will lower healthcare costs. But as Sherry was talking, I was thinking of a wonderful quote from the poet Marge Piercy. The pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real. And that doesn't have an arbitrary end date. But I didn't get interested in this issue from that side. I was involved in working with kids programs. I was really interested in mentoring, was involved in a study of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, been around for 100 years. And turns out Big Brothers, Big Sisters has a wonderful impact on kids. But at the time that we were studying this program, there was a shortage. There were 70,000 kids being matched and 30,000 on the waiting list. And it raised this fundamental question of where are the human beings to do those things that only human beings can do? And even if you just take the needs of young people, there's an accumulation of research which shows that support from caring adults makes an enormous difference in the well-being of the next generation. And if you try to answer that question, it turns out that society has essentially a solution waiting to happen. This vast increase of older people who not only have time and energy, and I think, to Sherry's point and Lynda's and Phil's, there's a unique moment now where people have this impulse to help and the capacity to do it. It's a kind of active wisdom. And there's also evidence that the key to happiness in later life is this kind of contribution. George Valent at Harvard Medical School shows that older people who get involved in the lives of young people, who mentor, who contribute in those ways, are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to do so. So it's a win-win of potentially staggering proportions. And then just one final comment is, as Sherry and Lynda's example and Phil's, this is a movement that's already happening in plain sight. It's not just famous, accomplished people like the panelists, but at Encore we did a study a couple of years ago. It showed that 4.5 million people in the second half of life are in Encore careers, second acts for the greater good. 21 million more give it a top priority, and they last about 10 years in duration. That's 250 million years of human and social capital that could contribute to some of the most pressing problems in society today. So I think there's a strong argument that as a community, we don't have a single person to waste, and here are millions of people who are presenting themselves.
I've heard some people describe it as just a messaging issue. If we would refer to, millennials have said, if we refer to age, replace the numbers with levels of a video game, younger people would look at older people with much more respect. Like, oh, you made it to level 10, I want your cheat codes.
That's great.
So Lynda, I want to get a cheat code from you, because the health benefits of one of your products, POM Wonderful, was challenged by the FTC. It was a legal battle, went on for years. I'm just curious as to what that battle taught you about yourself that perhaps you didn't know before.
To stay out of the legal issues and concentrate on my job, because I'm married to John Wayne, and if he wants to take on the FTC, that's fine. I know that isn't the answer you were looking for, but we have to know our talents in life, and I would get extremely upset about these issues because we were in the right. And this was an ugly thing that happened. And indeed, we won and lost at the same time. So drink POM, it's good for you. Then you'll have an Encore career. But it taught me to stay out, to really focus on what was important. And if somebody else is doing it and doing it better than I could, why do I have to do it? There's certain things that I can do better maybe than the next person. And that's what it taught me. It's not a sexy answer, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. And Lynda, I'm just, or actually let's pivot to Sherry, because you are being praised as a trailblazer in entertainment and Hollywood during your time at the head of studios. But pay equality, not just in this town, but in many industries, is a major issue. Women making roughly 80 cents to the dollar of men. I'm wondering, in your view, what can older women teach younger women about negotiating for a fair wage in ways that work and in ways that don't work? Is there something to be taught from generation to generation on that topic?
Well, not just women, men also. I think that, first of all, I think, unfortunately, the entertainment industry is perhaps, if not the most biased toward age, is certainly among the highest. And I would like to say that it starts at 60, but it starts at 40. If you pass 40, that's it, I mean, there are very few people past the age of 45 that are allowed to continue directing or producing. There are exceptions. We all know, Clint Eastwood's enormous talent, Steven Spielberg's. But it is a youth-oriented business, and it's shocking to me because every time you make a movie, like the Marigold Club, or you make a movie with older people in it, or put an older woman on the cover, it sells out. So it's interesting. I think what it's based on is that people tend to hire people that are like themselves.
Right.
So if your company is run by a younger person, they tend to be more comfortable with a younger person. What can my generation teach the younger generation? I think that, and again, there's not just my generation, there's a generation underneath the generation. I think that what has happened with the women's movement in the entertainment industry, but in all industries, is absolutely extraordinary, and I think the wisdom has been passed down already. In the entertainment industry, has been exposed that there wasn't equal pay. But what has happened was when I began in the business, and this is a very sad thing to say, but it was true, there were no women ahead, and we believed, sadly, that there was only room for one at the table. And so we were sadly suspicious of each other. We didn't bond together. We weren't close. We were afraid that if we told them about this script or this job, that maybe we would lose it. But there's been a seismic shift. I'm still involved in a lot of causes in the entertainment industry, and I see the sisterhood of women. And what has happened where these women are best friends, and they're saying, you should get that job. As Lynda said, this isn't my skill set, this is your skill set. Let me help you, let me make the call. And when they unite together, they have an incredible power. And we've seen what's happening in sexual harassment situations. If I had reported anything, I'd have just been fired. It would have been that simple, you know. Today, you go to the HR department, they're paying attention. If you have unequal pay, and you go and say that, you know, they're going to change it. When I was young, I was promoted to a job the same time a man was promoted. We had the exact same job. We were both promoted to senior vice presidents instead of vice presidents. He got a raise, I didn't. I went to the head of the company. I said, I'm sure you're going to give me a raise. You must have just forgot to tell me. And he said, oh, no. You're a single woman. He's a married man with 3 kids. And
Wow.
I just went, okay, because I was so grateful at the time to have a job. That would not happen
And it
today.
sounds like some of what you're saying is there's power in solidarity. USC did a study of the Best Picture Oscar-nominated
That's
movies
right.
from 2015, 2016, and found that only 12% of the characters in those movies were over the age of 60. 80% of them were men. Tina Fey, in talking about this, said, quote, there are still great roles in Hollywood for Meryl Streep's over 60. So should more women speak up?
Yes.
Speak out
Yes.
and be honest about their income, which is something men and
not
women
be
don't do.
afraid to say your age and own it and speak up about it. And when you're offered a job, make sure that it's equal pay for equal work, and speak up and don't be afraid. But I think, honestly, that's happening. It's certainly happening in the movie industry. Women are speaking, they're uniting together, they're looking at the numbers. That statistic came out, and it came out whereas before no one was paying attention to it. And the minute you start to have the facts and the data, then people start to react. And for example, Ryan Murphy, who's a very, very talented man who just did Feud, and he's done many hit shows. That's the most recent one. Has decided that 50% of the women on all of his, 50% of the people on all of his shows will be women.
Wow.
So that's a big leader in our industry. Someone else is going to do it, then someone else. People are looking to hire the most talented person, and that's the first thing, but not to not hire the most talented person because it's a woman.
Phil, when we talk about these types of issues, you know, sexism is not socially acceptable. Racism is another one of those things that is kind of a universal, it's just not okay. For some reason, ageism seems more appropriate or at least less controversial than some of the other isms. Why is that? How do we undo that?
Well, I think we're in an evolving phase. I mean, the social narratives that we're living today are ones that go back really way over 100 years. I mean, if you think about the benchmark that has defined age today, it was really Bismarck who did that first. And it happened in 1883, and it had to do with when you get your pension. And of course, you know, decades later, it was Roosevelt and Social Security. So we still think about the age journey in a language and set of metrics that is really no longer relevant. Now, to the point that everyone has spoken, but when Marc gave some of the statistics earlier today, I think that the process of change will take place for a number of reasons. One is the point that Lynda and Sherry made is they're going to be the ambassadors to the future. They're going to change the whole perception as leaders of this movement. But the second is there are going to be so many more people who are older than younger. So, the numbers are astounding, right? In the United States, within just 14 years, 20% of the population is going to be older than 65. Marc was alluding to this earlier. In Japan, China, many parts of Europe, it's going to be over 40%. That's as many people as there are young people. When I think of, in the university that I'm at today at Stanford, if the first undergraduates that came out of Stanford in 1895, the class that included Herbert Hoover, they were middle-aged when they graduated. That's because the life expectancy then was 46 years of age. Right? Today, I teach undergraduates, freshmen today. When they graduate, they've got 50 or 60 years of life ahead of them. So the perception of ageism, I think, will go through, hopefully, some of the same changes that have taken place in some of the other isms that you spoke about. And we need to be part of making that happen.
And Lynda, as you market your products, Fiji Water, Pom Wonderful, and others, you're the boss. And I know that you look at ways that people can connect with these things emotionally. Do you in any way try to address ageism, or are you mindful of how people of certain ages are portrayed in your ads and what you put out?
We base a lot of our thinking on research, and we really, we do it in-house. We don't hire outside people. The POM market is 45 plus because people have come to terms with their own mortality, and so that's a much older market. Pistachios, everybody eats. So, and Fiji water, you have to have a certain income, I guess, to buy it. It's the most expensive water. And if you want to meet me afterwards, I can tell you why. Or you can read the back label. It's all on there.
Always working.
Always working. But we don't really, and halos, for instance, the little clementines, they're children. And I've been fighting with my marketing team because they have a voice. Believe me, I don't dominate. I mean, maybe they would disagree, but I think that it's a more universal product than just little children because they're easy to peel and so forth. So, but as far as actors in the advertising, I've never thought of age because it doesn't seem to be an issue that we would grapple with. I have personal feelings about it, being 74 years old. You see, I admitted my age. No gasping.
They're stunned.
They're stunned. Against me. But I will tell you that even very early on in my career, I remember we were looking for a great copywriter, and a fellow's resume came across my desk, and they said, but he's too old, he's 50. I said, what? Look at this background. He stayed with us for 20 years. He was brilliant. And so we have people of all ages in our company, and Stuart and I are so old that, a lot of people have been around for a long time.
But that's, I guess, the benefit of cross-generational cooperation. Marc, you've done some work on this. You helped develop AARP's Experience Core. That helped get people over 50 to improve the education for low-income people. I'm just wondering what surprised you in developing those programs about the benefits of cross-generational relationships?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's just reproducing what happened naturally for most of life and most of the life of this country. But, 50 years ago, and this is a story that I always am tempted to tell. So this hotel was built by Del Webb, who 4 years later opened the first age-segregated retirement community in America and coined the phrase the golden years. And almost single-handedly rebranded later life as a second youth. Graying is playing, which has lasted for half a century. And it's a reminder, I think, of how much, to Lynda's point and some of the other things that have been said, how much we really need some reframing of this time in life, and rather than people trying to be young, that they need to be there for those who actually are, because it's, I think, the real fountain of youth. This is what I learned from Experience Corps, is the fountain with youth. That is the secret to, it's not radical life extension, it's through being involved with the next generation that we really live on. And so many people, I think, have a deep desire to do that, but they're in this kind of limbo land entering this period of life, and it's very much like the creation of adolescence 100 years ago. At the beginning of the last century, we had all these young people. They weren't children, they weren't adults, we didn't know what to do with them, and somebody came up with the brilliant idea that there was this thing called teenagers, and we invented high schools and child labor laws, and eventually, even a name. And I think that's what's happening now. We have a population explosion of people who are flooding into a period of life that is very confusing. It's like the oxymoronic years, the young old, the working retired, but it's the biggest segment of people in this period of life. And you could argue that it's one of the sweet spots in life where you have the benefits of experience and the time to actually do something with it.
And Sherry, in your philanthropic work, how much are you learning from the people who are on the front lines, say, of cancer research and other things? And in what ways do the younger people you meet in your organizations impress you or give you a sense of pride?
I actually think that this younger generation, especially of college students, is the most hopeful that I've seen in a long time.
I agree.
Because
Absolutely.
this generation of college students, who are going to be our future, first of all, has absolutely no prejudice. I mean, it's just extraordinary. All the things that we fought for and worked for, they are colorblind, genderblind. They just don't care about anything except the soul of the person that they're dealing with. So right away, that's light years from the way that all of us grew up. And second, it's really interesting. They also don't care who earns more money, their partner or them. They couldn't care less. So they don't have that competitive spirit, oh, my wife better not earn more money than me, or my partner, my same-sex partner. They don't care. And third, they have an incredible need to do service. There is an extraordinary number, and I can't give you the exact statistic, you probably can better than me, Marc, but I see it every day of people that go, no, I want to go in the not-for-profit area. I really, really want to work in not-for-profit. So for the first time, when we go to populate these programs, we're not begging people to do them. Right. They're coming in, and we're able to pick people that could do anything they wanted in their life. I mean, you can see, Teach for America. Some of them do it forever. Some of them say, I just have to do, like the Peace Corps, I just have to do X amount of years of service. So this generation gives me incredible hope. And as confusing as the world is today, I look at the youth and I think, wow, we're going to be okay.
And I think for a young person to hear you say that would be inspired as well. There certainly is. It's a two-way beneficial relationship. Phil, for you, as when you were dean of Stanford School of Medicine, I'm sure you came into contact with many different people, but were there ways in which your students impressed you and actually taught you something that perhaps they didn't realize?
Well, that's a great question. I think we are constantly, of course, learning from each other if we hold ourselves open to the information that comes at us. And I think that, as someone like others on this panel who perhaps grew up at a period of idealism where we thought we could change the world, I have been actually, over the last years until recently, somewhat discouraged by not seeing young people take a stand. And I think now that has changed, and that does give one incredible hope. I think that what I've seen in the slice of life that I deal with are people who have made the decision to go into medicine and health is that they come with an enormous amount of altruism. They look at, with some sadness, as do I, the healthcare system that we have in this country, which is quite a disgrace in many ways, which leaves people out and has had a very narrow focus on really the corporatization of medicine, and they want to see a different world there. And I think that's something that I'm really inspired by and wish to see them be able to achieve. And I think to the point that Sherry was making, I think there's an interesting merger that is evolving. As I talk to people literally now around the world who are in this sense, pivoting and looking to make a change, the most common thing that people say to me is that they want to do good. They want to have a life in which they're having an impact. And if young people, beginning their careers also want to have an impact, that's kind of a really important marriage that can have a potentially larger synergistic transformation.
Was there a certain point recently where you gained inspiration from young people speaking out loud?
Yeah, yesterday. Every day. No, I think that is...
certainly more recently.
More recently. Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm not answering you. I think over the last 4 to 5 years, I was pretty struck, in the first part of the 2000s, that there was a lot of silence as horrific things were happening in the world. And I'm really pleased to see now that there's a rise up and saying, no, we want to do something different. And I think among the most dramatic things of, that where hope evolves is, this is the generation, yours, and those before you, who are inheriting a world that we've largely contaminated. And so they're very inspired, to deal with topics of climate change and like. I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face right now at this moment, and I say this as a academic, a physician, and a scientist, is that we've always held truth to be the value that guides our interactions. We've always held as a really almost sacred trust that we'll be able to share information with each other in a factual way. And there is such a disregard for that is happening now, that I hope that those who are coming through the generations and those who are sort of at the stage of life we are will, stand up for truth and stand up for honesty and integrity.
And Lynda, anyone who knows you will be aware of your sharp sense of humor. When Stephen Colbert introduced you, before you received an award in Aspen, he made reference to your pistachio business and saying, Lynda Resnick, she's a good nut. Do you agree? And how important is humor in cross-generational relationships and really relationships of any kind?
Really, I was hoping for a meatier question, but I will say that my sense of humor is inherited from my mother and father. They were both hysterical. My brother has a sense of humor. Everyone in the family does. And I think that life is difficult, obviously not so difficult for me, but it is hard to navigate yourself through life. And if you can laugh at yourself and have a lightness about yourself, it just helps.
Yeah.
So what, you say you want a media question. Are you inspired by
I am,
on-campus protests and demonstrations and marches?
Well, I
in
did the
Washington,
biggest
for example?
protest. I was on trial for the Pentagon Papers, so I learned at an early age to keep my mouth shut. But and is there anyone in the room that's ever heard of the Pentagon Papers?
Yes.
Anyway, look it up. It's interesting. So, but I just want to say briefly that in the Central Valley, we have a scourge, which is diabetes. In America, it is much worse than you think. 85 million people are pre-diabetic. In the Central Valley, it is higher than anywhere else in America. It's the worst counties in America. And we've been fighting this with our healthcare. This is our #1 goal. And I woke up with another epiphany one day, and I said, look, the kids stopped their parents from smoking, and they got them to start using seatbelts. Let's go ask the teenagers in our schools how they feel about this. Does anyone have, in our focus groups, does anyone have anyone in their family with diabetes? Every hand goes up. They've seen what happens with amputations, losing eyesight, and so forth, and going on dialysis. So we invited them, do you want to be soldiers of change? And they do. And so even though we're doing all this propaganda, if you work for us in the Central Valley, you are inundated with propaganda every day about healthcare. We give classes, we teach stress management. We do everything in our clinics, from psychiatry to physical therapy, as well as the standard. But I know that in order to really move the needle, those kids are going to have to come forward, and they want to do it. And so our campaign going forward will be getting the children to bring this message home. And that's And they were so willing, they really wanted to be part of the movement. And they're 16 years old, 15 and 16 years old, so there's so much hope.
Well, I want to touch on that hope because, as we've discussed, I mean, when you go through these life experiences, you are battle tested. You've learned more about what you're capable of. Marc, I want to kind of go down the panel here. If you were able to travel back in time a few decades, give yourself a key piece of advice at a critical moment in your life, what would it have been and why?
You know, that it's a long distance race, that you don't have to try to cram everything into, a brief opportunity, but that there are multiple bites at the apple, and that in many ways the richest opportunities are the ones that lie ahead. And I wanted to just pick up on what Lynda was saying. We are living in a golden age of intergenerational relationships. You know, we hear about kids versus canes and this, gray wave of greedy geezers taking America to the cleaners. The Pew Research Centers have never seen such high levels of affection between older and younger people, and we're at the highest levels of older and younger people living together since the 1940s. And so it's a real opportunity to do the kinds of things that involve connecting generations for mutual benefit.
And what about
I was
for you,
just going to
Sherry?
say your favorite person is always your grandmother.
You're right.
Because she gave you everything you wanted. She thought you were perfect every time. I couldn't get something, I'd call my grandmother. I think the advice that I would give myself, and I'm still giving it to myself, because we are still all a work in progress, is that everything is not a life or death issue. I always think, oh my God, this is going to happen, and that's like terrible. So I would have given myself the advice to have more fun, and not to, and I'm not saying I didn't have a lot of fun, but not to take everything quite so seriously, because when things would go wrong, I did think they were life or death issues, and of course they're not. Sometimes your biggest failure turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you, and turns to lead to the greatest success in your life. I once read in someone's book that success is not built on success, it's built on failure, picking yourself up. So there's a great line someone said to me the other day. They said, yes, I've lived through a lot of terrible things, and some of them actually happened. So it's just worrying about the future.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
And Lynda, what would you, if you could rewind the clock, get back into time, give advice to yourself that would have really helped you, what would it have been?
I think I would have started keeping my journal earlier because, like Sherry, everything is the same to me. I broke a nail, Uncle Sam died. It's like everything is a calamity. But when I sit down and read my journal and go back 10 years and I see the other struggles that I went through and how they resolved, or how one bad thing led to another, I agree with Sherry completely. I would have started my journal a lot earlier because I think it gives you focus and
So you look back and see pages and think to yourself, wow, that was a big deal to me at that point.
Right, and now I couldn't
such
care
little-
less. And so, that's the life lesson for me.
And Phil, what do you think? What's the sage advice?
Sage advice. Well, it's interesting as I'm hearing everyone else speak, the commonalities in the way we might look at things. It's interesting that when I was beginning my career, coming from a very different kind of background, sort of the first person to go to high school in my family. So I had a kind of very narrow view of what my life journey was going to be. And when I was choosing in medicine what to go into, I chose pediatrics, largely because I didn't want to deal with old people. And so now when I think about that, I have a slightly different reflection on that reality.
And we have just a few final minutes here, and I know you've all been patient in the room. If there are any questions you have for our panelists, quickly throw your hands up. We'll try and get a microphone to you. Introduce yourself and direct the question to the panelists of your choice. Test, test, 1, 2. Go ahead. We can translate.
Hello, yes. Hey, good afternoon. My name is Mike Shaw. I work with Whole Foods Markets. And I want to first acknowledge all of you for your extraordinary experiences. Thank you so much. I think, Sherry, you may have answered my question, but as each of you have moved from success to significance. And we realize that this millennial generation is somewhat apathetic in their choice of lifestyles, of brands, of behaviors. Is there one piece of advice that you could offer younger people? I know you just did that, but if there was one piece of advice you could offer millennials to go from success to significance, what could it be? Thank you.
So,
Sure.
So I would say the greatest thing that I learned young in life was you cannot fill yourself up from the outside. You know, I think when you talk about the millennials, I think what you're talking about is their need for material things and their need, you know, they become successful and then they raise the bar again and they say, I could only get this, and then they raise the bar again. You can't fill yourself up from the outside. You really can't. I don't care how much you have. It will not make you feel better about yourself if you haven't filled yourself up inside. And the only way you're going to fill yourself up, the only way you're going to have self-esteem, of course success in your business will do good things, but the greatest joy, and I actually think they've shown this hormonally, is to give back. Is to actually make somebody else's life better because of the blessings that you have. And the greatest, and there have been all these studies I've been reading later, and I'll tell this because it so affected me, the lesson of gratitude and not competing with somebody else. And competing with somebody else is a death. Because there's always somebody that has more, whatever. But to be grateful. And I will just end with this. I met a 97-year-old woman at an event the other day. And she was standing so tall, and she was so thin, and she was so beautiful, and she had these heels on, which, as you can see, I certainly don't have. And I looked at her, and someone said to me, we were talking, and she was very alive. And I looked at her, and I said, wow, what's your secret? I mean, she was just engaged with everything. And she said, well, I'll give it to you. Genes, attitude, and gratitude. And that is the truth. And that wisdom has really changed my life.
I was hoping she was going to say whiskey.
She didn't.
I want to thank our panelists so much for barely touching on what's such a fantastic issue. They'll be available to take more questions from you if they have the time. So just finally, to wrap up this panel, I want to thank Marc Freedman, Sherry Lansing, Professor Philip Pizzo, and Lynda Resnick. Thank you all very much.
We want to thank you. You were great.
Well, thank you.